560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. President Trump yesterday holding a press availability at his Doral Club in West Palm, and had this to say in terms of a progress report on the military campaign in Iran.
A new country, but they have no Navy, they have no Air Force, they have no anti-aircraft equipment. It's all been blown up. They have no radar. They have no telecommunications. And they have no leadership. It's all gone. So, you could look at that statement. We could call it a tremendous success right now as we leave here. I could call it, or we could go further. And we're going to go further. But the big risk on that war has been over for 3 days. We wiped them out in the first 2 days. When you think about it, it's incredible. We wiped out a big Navy, very powerful Navy. These were ships. These were serious ships. These were ships that you buy when you want to win battles. They're all on the bottom floor. The sailors are all running off the ships. They refuse to get on the ships. The Air Force is gone. Everything's gone. The missiles are down to a trickle. The drones are down to probably 25%, and they'll soon be down to nothing. We'll have where they manufactured the drones are under fire as we speak. They're being hit. So the rest is going to be determination as to my attitude, along with the people in the Trump administration, what we want to do. Thank you.
5,000 targets struck, more than 50 ships damaged or sunk, per what Trump was describing there. That's according to CENTCOM. And he went on to say, you heard him say, the missile launch sites largely destroyed, drones largely destroyed, but they're still bombing the manufacturing base for drones. There are still missile launch sites that they want to take out. So it's not done yet. We could say mission accomplished right now and walk away, but we're not going to do that for those reasons. In addition to one other, we have to make sure that important shipping lanes stay open. And this was his message to the Iranians with respect to whatever capacity they think they have to disrupt shipping lanes like the Strait of Hormuz.
So the Strait of Hormuz is going to remain safe. We have a lot of Navy ships there. We have the best equipment in the world, inspecting for mines. Again, most of their ships are down at the bottom of the sea, but we will hit them so hard that it will not be possible for them or anybody else helping them to ever recover that section of the world. They do anything.
Yeah, and I tend to believe him. So those who are suggesting that if Iran is able to block shipping lanes for an extended period of time, then they're able to extend this military engagement by the United States past the time horizon that the president has offered, then people will get impatient and the Trump administration will get antsy and Iran can steal victory from the jaws of defeat. I don't think it's going to go down that way. I don't think that's where the trajectory of this is. To reiterate his sense of urgency, President Trump said this yesterday about this quote-unquote excursion. Even using the term excursion gives you an idea that he wants to be in and out.
Our country is doing really well. I mean, at a level that nobody thought. We took a little excursion because we felt we had to do that to get rid of some evil. And I think you'll see it's going to be a short-term excursion.
Short-term excursion. And when I asked for more clarity on that term by a New York Times reporter at that press availability.
on Iran, you called it an excursion. You said it would be over soon. Are you thinking this week it will be over?
No,
Are you talking
but soon.
about days?
I think soon.
Okay, and with respect
Very
to...
soon. Look, everything they have is gone, including their leadership. In fact, there are two levels of leadership, and even actually, as it turns out, more than that. But two levels of leadership are gone. Most people have never even heard about the leaders that they're talking about. So it's obviously been very, very powerful, very effective.
For more on this and other matters, including perhaps the SAVE Act, we're pleased to be joined by Wisconsin Senator, Republican Ron Johnson. Senator Johnson, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Hope you're doing well.
You too, and your assessment of Trump's progress report yesterday.
Well, there's no doubt about it that it's been quite stunning in terms of what they've achieved. The surprise of taking out the head Ayatollah and so much of their leadership, so much of their military assets. The concern is keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. They have other capabilities. They still have drones, mines. More difficult to deploy those when they don't have a Navy. But I think the biggest thing is the IRGC and the 200,000 members of that military organization, plus I can't pronounce it's a Basij or whatever, their police force, their military. And these are the people that literally slaughtered, and I've heard numbers anywhere from 32,000 to 36 to 40,000 Iranians. They were probably peacefully protesting within literally a matter of days. And to put that in context, there were about 16,000 or 17,000 people executed during the French Revolution, 2,000 to 5,000 during the Spanish Inquisition. The Iranian regime slaughtered 30,000 to 40,000 of its own people in a couple of days. And of course, the leftist media, they're going to concentrate on the children. And of course, any civilian casualties are a tragedy because most of those civilians do not like the regime. And the U.S. and Israel doing everything they can to limit those civilian regimes. But this regime is not going to go quietly into the night. The Revolutionary Guard are so hated by the Iranian people, they're going to have to fight to the end, probably.
Well, what is your perspective, though, in terms of the regime change, if that were to occur? This is, it's been stated by the president at the outset, repeated by Secretary Hegseth and others, that would we like to see a different leadership in Tehran? Of course. Is this regime change part of the defined military objective? It's not. So we're providing this opening for the Iranian people to depose their leadership. Well, we were talking about Khamenei, and now we're talking about his kid, but it's the same deal. We're providing an opening for that to occur, but we're not staying for as long as that may take, depending on how things go.
Right. I'm just pointing out how difficult it's going to be for the Iranian people to regain control of their company when you have the brutality and the numbers on the other side.
Yeah.
And again, this is a danger for America. We open up our borders. We let in millions of people. We don't know who they are. Everybody suspected that it could be Iranian sleeper cells. These folks are not, as I said, they're not going quietly in the night. This is existential to them. If they were to, unless they were to capitulate and join the Iranian people, but it does not look like they're going to do that. So again, I think this is a great opportunity. There's a possibility of resetting geopolitics in a positive direction here. But the Iranian IRGC and the other police forces, they're not going along with it.
Are the the Revolutionary Guard, compounds, for example, and any other sort of malign organizations, those are legitimate military targets, distinguished from the citizenry. Do you think, or do you know, if there is perhaps sustained targeting of the foot soldiers, essentially, that may change? Because President Trump initially, I think it was over the weekend, talked about his calls for the IRGC to lay down their arms and they would be granted amnesty. And there was some indication that some of that was happening as these individuals that are operating some of the missile command centers have been taken out and so forth. But you're suggesting that's not happening now. I wonder if that's still part of the unresolved aspect of this campaign.
I'm sure it is. And again, Iran is known about this threat, our overwhelming military force. They've literally probably been planning this for 47 years. they're not stupid people. They're dedicated terrorists. And so the whole command structure is pretty decentralized, which you can tell by they're still trying to do missile strikes and drone strikes and that type of thing. And so I'm just saying this is going to be far more difficult than we would wish it to be.
Oh, yeah. Kamal Karzai is some sort of senior advisor to the Ayatollah. He sat down with a flack from CNN, and this was his message to Trump.
What is important for us is the end of this game, and we are ready to continue that game.
The end of this game, you mean how this war will end?
Yeah, the end of the game would be the time that American and Israelis would come to this understanding that this strategy is not working, and they have to stop their aggressions against Iranians.
And Karzai said, there's no room for diplomacy at this point because, of course, the great Satan has broken his word and blah, blah, blah. But so that's what they're fronting. What's your reaction to that? I mean, how does the administration process statements like that?
I'll underscore this is not going to be easy. This would be so easy for the Iranian regime to stay in power, brutalize their population without any threat for America. Is all they had to do is say, we're not going to pursue a nuclear weapon. We are not going to enrich uranium. If we're going to have a nuclear power, we'll buy the power rods. That's all they ever had to do. They would never have sanctions. We would just leave them alone, pretty much like we leave North Korea alone.
Yeah.
The problem is they would not give up their nuclear ambitions. They were getting closer and closer. They were building so many missiles. At some point in time, we were going to have to stop them before it was too late. That's what Trump did. Again, I'm not opposed to what Trump did. I'm just pointing out this is going to be extremely difficult. They wiped out 40,000 people already. They've been wiping out the leaders of any opposition. So there's not an organized opposition. There's certainly not an armed one. So this is going to be very difficult.
Well, I mean, would you have any problem, though, saying, look, at some point, on that 4 to 5 week horizon that the president gave, we have, as he said yesterday, we could already declare victory and wrap it up. We've accomplished the military objectives that I set forth when I announced the strikes against Iran. We have pushed back their weapon systems, their nuclearization program, at least for a generation. We have further isolated them from the civilized world, even in their own region, with respect to Arab states. So there's exactly what we wanted to accomplish. We did accomplish, and we've provided a path for the Iranian people to topple this murderous regime, and that's pending. But that's an Iranian issue. We've done what we could do. We've done what we set out to do. Would there be any problem with that occurrence?
As long as you're realistic to the point that the IRGC are still there, they'll still be able to produce drones. Again, those are not particularly expensive to build, and you don't need big manufacturing facilities to do it, so it's hard to see where they are.
True.
And we really kicked them off, okay? So now they will be really out for revenge, and we need to be on guard. So it's not like we can do this, walk away, and say, okay, we've taken care of this for all time. No, we're going to have to keep, as they refer to as, we're going to keep mowing the grass. We're going to have to keep degrading their capability, or they're just going to rise as a threat again. I mean, we have to make sure they never become a nuclear power, but you get somebody like Obama or Biden in there, they'll funnel billions of dollars into the Iranian regime to coddle them and help them become stronger and stronger. That's what happened under Obama and Biden. This is why Trump had to take this action. So, again, this is a good thing that Trump has done. I'm just saying it is far more difficult in terms of eliminating this threat for all time.
Yeah, no, I mean, it requires sober assessments, no question. I wanted to get your reaction to another topic Trump addressed yesterday at the Congressional Institute confab. Of course, he's talking about the SAVE Act. This is all he hears people asking about when he's on the campaign trail, saying this.
And we're going to have to push the Senate because you have 4 or 5 senators that are, 4 or 5 Republican senators. You'll have to explain them to me, but we're not going to get into that. But we're going to push them to get it done because I don't think you can politically exist if you're not going to do voter ID and these things. I don't think the people in this country will stand for it. So I'm making my biggest plea tonight. It'll make you, and I'm not doing it for this reason, at all, it'll guarantee the midterms. It'll guarantee the midterms. If you don't get it, big trouble, my opinion.
And, of course, as you know, he said, I'm not signing anything that comes to my desk until the SAVE Act does, and if that takes 6 months, then so be it. John Thune yesterday said something on NBC News that was not confidence-inspiring in terms of the prospect of getting this done. Where do things stand from your perspective in the Senate?
Well, first of all, everybody has to understand if we don't provide greater security for our elections, putting these common sense controls, 80% of Americans want voter ID, it's because Democrats refuse to put controls in place to make sure that your legitimate vote's not canceled by fraudulent. This is Democrats that are blocking this. Now, do we have issues in the Senate? We do. I'm all for, because I recognize that the next time the Democrats get power, they will end the filibuster. We ought to beat them to the punch. We ought to do it. We do not have enough votes to end the filibuster in the United States Senate right now. We don't even have a willingness on the part of Senate leadership to bring it to a vote, because they don't want to expose those who would vote against it. I think that's probably where this is probably headed, that we're going to probably have to do that, because, listen, I'm all for the talking filibuster. I'm all for bringing this to the floor and making Democrats day after day after day defend why they oppose something 80% of American people support. But bringing that talking filibuster to an actual vote at 50 votes is unlikely. Let's put it that way. There are so many ways under current rules that, again, unless you limit the filibuster, it's just never going to come to a simple majority vote. So, again, I do not like overpromising what is almost impossible to deliver. I think probably the only way the Save America Act passes is if we get enough public pressure, enough public support to get Democrats to help us pass it, or get enough Republicans say, no, the Democrats are being so obnoxious, so obstructionist, we realize this is existential in terms of election security, that we're going to end the filibuster and, save America. That's my assessment of it.
Well, so, it was interesting that Trump resisted naming names at this juncture. I assume that means he wants to try to have civil, behind closed doors conversations before he has to take he has to publicly target those recalcitrant GOP senators. But it seems like a maximum pressure campaign on Democrats to do what John Fetterman is willing to do, or maximum pressure campaign on those 3 or 4 recalcitrant senators to do what the rest of its caucus is willing to do.
Well, what I suggested at the start of this Congress is our first vote ought to be to eliminate the filibuster. And it would be interesting, because every Democrat wants to do it. With Trump in power, it would have been interesting to see how Democrats are going to vote on that. It's the only way I could see them getting on the record that they don't want to end the filibuster, so we can maybe move on and say, okay, we're not going to eliminate the filibuster because they're on records of not doing it. But by not taking that vote, Democrats have no pressure when they get the control of it to just end the filibuster, which I'm quite certain they'll do. So again, from my standpoint, we ought to take a vote, and that's the best way of fleshing this out. Let's vote. Who wants to end the filibuster? And if nothing else, it'll force the Democrats to go on record of really what hypocrites they truly are.
Yeah, I mean, I see that, but I mean, the other question though is, and you don't have to name names, but you're welcome to, those senators that Trump is referring to, and you certainly know, like what is their argument? This is at minimum a 2/3 issue, no matter what state you're talking about. So, I mean, what would their argument be to not force Democrats into the talking filibuster at minimum and support the SAVE Act? I mean, is this just Trump animus or what?
Again, I'm fully supportive of ending the filibuster. I'm fully supportive of the talking filibuster. The reluctance of Republicans to end the filibuster is we know the filibuster has stopped all kinds of awful socialist legislation would have put us on a path of destruction a lot earlier. So we understand the value of the filibuster in the past. But they're not recognizing the current reality.
No, but I'm talking about senators who are unwilling to press Democrats to do a talking filibuster, to formalize the filibuster. They're not even willing to do that. So that seems to be the indication, isn't it?
So one of the reluctance is, in a true legislative process, there'd all kinds of nasty amendments that people don't want to vote on. or the vulnerable senators that the leadership doesn't want them to have to vote on because we want to maintain the majority. That's starting down the nitty gritty of this thing. But again, we could solve that by bringing it to the floor, filling both the First and Second Amendment tree, and then we control the amendment process. We actually use this process to perfect the legislation. If we've got some senators that have a concern with what we want to do with reasonable restrictions of mail-in ballots, okay, let's talk about how we can accommodate the concerns for your state. In other words, we simply do not use the Senate and the amendment process the way it's intended. Introduce a piece of legislation and then try and perfect it through the amendment process. What ends up happening is somebody writes these pieces of legislation. Most of them are awful. They bring them to the floor. If it's going to pass, it's bipartisan. We're working right now on this road to housing bill. This is I voted against it. There are many elements I don't like about it, but this is hugely bipartisan. No, we're not going to have any amendments on this thing. Nobody truly knows exactly what's in this thing or what the implication is going to be. But somebody's written this thing and they're going to jam it through. This is not what people envision in terms of how legislation is produced, because we have this massive government doing all the things that we shouldn't do. And I would argue the things in the Road to Housing Act, federal government probably shouldn't even be involved in. But again, that's the state of play right now. I know I'm not the most uplifting character, but we would be a lot better off not passing virtually anything other than some of these incredibly important pieces of legislation like Save America Act to secure our elections. But we distract ourselves with all these other pieces of legislation that, okay, great, they're bipartisan. Look at what we did. It'll have no impact on really the things that the American people really are affecting their lives.
No, it's an excellent point. John Kennedy, Senator John Kennedy, your colleague, suggested that you could move the SAVE Act through reconciliation. What's your assessment of that prospect?
Again, you have the Senate parliamentarian that would rule that more policy than budgetary. She would say it wouldn't survive the bird bath. And then you would have senators, same thing. One form of the nuclear option, and we probably wouldn't have the support to do it. So it's a nice head fake.
Yeah.
But again, I'm just laying out the reality of the situation. In order to pass the Save America Act, I think we have to end the filibuster. And that's quite honestly what Trump ought to be focusing on. And what he really ought to do is he ought to have the Senate vote on that. Are you going to end the filibuster or not?
Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin, thank you for joining us as always. Always appreciate your insights and candor.
Have a great day.
And Senator Ron Johnson joined us on Chicago's Morning Answer.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Shh, here she comes.
Surprise! They sent a duplicate shipment.